The wheels on my daughter's motorized chair spun faster than they ever had before. She was rolling uncontrollably toward a busy intersection, with cars hurtling past at speeds that could end her life in an instant. The street sloped more steeply than I'd realized. She tried tapping the brakes on her joystick, but it was useless. I saw her struggling to regain control, her eyes wide with terror, and my own heart pummeled my chest. In that horrifying moment, time seemed to stretch like a thin rubber band. It threatened to snap at any second. I sprinted forward, desperate to reach her, but I was too far away. A good Samaritan leaped in front of her chair and yanked it sideways, saving her by mere inches from the relentless roar of traffic. My daughter's name is Lily. She is 14 years old and has spinal muscular atrophy, a condition that weakens her muscles but not her spirit. And on that terrible day, she very nearly died because someone decided to sabotage the brakes on her wheelchair. The reason behind that sabotage traces back to a local homeowners association known as Redwood Landing, and more specifically to a woman named Karen Lancaster. People hear the term HOA and might think about neatly trimmed lawns, monthly meetings over minor neighborhood disputes, or perhaps a sense of community pride. Redwood Landing looked serene on the surface. Pastel houses in tidy rows, manicured gardens brimming with hydrangeas and rose bushes, freshly painted mailboxes in front of each driveway. It seemed like the picturesque neighborhood Lily and I had been searching for. We had moved there seeking stability after a painful chapter in our lives. I lost my wife, Lily's mother, to a sudden aneurysm 2 years prior. Lily, who was born with her neuromuscular disease, needed a calm environment and accessible living arrangements. At first glance, Redwood Landing offered wide sidewalks, well-kept roads, and the promise of a safe suburban setting. We never imagined that the same neighborhood would hide a menace more insidious than any I'd faced in my line of work. And what exactly is my line of work? I've spent 13 years in the FBI specializing in tactical operations, infiltration, and evidence gathering. That's not something I typically announce to the neighbors. In fact, Redwood Landing was supposed to be my sanctuary away from the job. Lily and I needed time to heal, to regroup, to embrace a semblance of normal life. But soon after our arrival, an ever-present hostility began emanating from the person who held power in that neighborhood. Karen Lancaster, the HOA president. She was the embodiment of refined tyranny, pearls around her neck, impeccably styled hair, a voice layered with politeness so thick it felt like syrup. Underneath that facade simmered a determination to preserve property values and neighborhood standards at any cost, especially if that cost fell upon someone else. Our trouble started with a wheelchair ramp. The front of our new home had 3 steps. Lily couldn't climb them. We arranged for a temporary ramp until we could file the appropriate paperwork for a more permanent, aesthetically pleasing structure that complied with Redwood Landing's guidelines. Within days, we received a formal notice from the HOA. No ramp could be installed without prior approval. Any ramp would have to meet the strict visual criteria of the neighborhood. It didn't matter that Lily needed it to enter her own house safely. I called the HOA office to explain my daughter's disability, leaving voice messages that went unanswered. Then came a letter with Karen Lancaster's signature requesting a meeting to discuss compliance. I arrived at the HOA board office. Karen greeted me with a rehearsed smile. She was slender and graceful in her movements. Her expression radiated condescension, even though her tone was sweet. She wasted no time opening her binder of regulations, pointing to paragraphs about community aesthetics. I tried to stay calm. I explained that the Americans with Disabilities Act granted Lily the right to have reasonable modifications for access, and Karen just gave me that unblinking smile and said, "We understand your situation, of course. But Redwood Landing has standards to maintain which preserve property values for everyone. We cannot allow unsightly additions to the front of a home, and that ramp is quite visible." I forced myself to keep my voice level. My daughter uses a motorized wheelchair. She literally cannot get inside without that ramp. Karen nodded sympathetically, but it was a hollow gesture. "Perhaps you could build a ramp at the rear entrance," she suggested. That would be less disruptive for the neighborhood's overall visual harmony. Her words were coated with feigned compassion. Her intention was to push Lily and me out of sight. That was when I realized we might be dealing with more than a stiff set of rules. There was discrimination at play. Lily, however, didn't let it discourage her at first. She's that kind of girl, bright, curious, determined. She saw Redwood Landing's tree-lined streets as an exciting new domain, rolling her chair with enthusiasm around the cul-de-sac to meet neighbors. A few of them were pleasant enough. Some offered cookies or a friendly wave, but many seemed unnerved by Lily's presence, as if a wheelchair somehow threatened their pristine bubble. We noticed uneasy glances, forced smiles, and overshadowing everything was Karen's watchful eye. She would walk her perfectly groomed poodle along the sidewalk, pausing in front of our property, arms crossed, that same distant frown etched on her face. Within 2 weeks of moving in, I received a second, more forceful notice. We were in violation of multiple HOA rules, from the ramp itself to Lily's motorized device that may damage sidewalks. The letter contained an attached invoice for fines. It also threatened a lien on our home if we refused to comply. I felt my temperature rising. These tactics were clearly meant to coerce us, but I wasn't about to back down. I paid a visit to Redwood Landing's local building department and discovered that, legally, we had every right to install the ramp for medical necessity. Yet the HOA leadership claimed they had final say over any external modifications. It was a standoff that hinged on who had the time, money, and patience to fight it. Karen assumed we'd cave, as others likely had. She had no idea that I dealt with far bigger bullies in my line of work. What I didn't expect was how rapidly the hostility escalated. One morning, Lily found the ramp partially loosened. A couple of bolts had been unscrewed. I tightened them, installed a few discreet security cameras around our porch, and reported it to Redwood Landing's local police. They took a cursory statement, but showed little interest. After all, no one was injured. Then came petty acts of vandalism, garbage tossed onto our lawn, small dents in my mailbox. Lily's wheelchair tires were mysteriously deflated one afternoon. I'd come home to find her upset, stuck in the house because she couldn't go out on flat tires. Each time, I tried to reassure her, "Don't worry, we'll handle this." But I could see the toll it was taking. Late one evening, I sat at the kitchen table, poring over HOA documents highlighting areas where Redwood Landing's rules conflicted with federal laws. My plan was to confront Karen and the board at the next open meeting. Suddenly, Lily came wheeling into the kitchen, her expression uneasy. She'd seen something odd on the camera feeds. We checked the computer screen. A figure in dark clothes was lurking near the side of our house. They seemed to be tampering with the foundation of the ramp. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, but they were gone. That's when I realized we were caught in a war of attrition. Redwood Landing's outward charm was a veneer covering Karen's campaign to drive us out, likely because Lily's presence didn't align with her sanitized vision of a perfect community. I decided to gather as much proof as possible. My FBI background gave me access to certain investigative strategies, though I had to tread carefully. Mixing personal vendettas with professional resources was a gray area. Still, I installed better cameras, set up motion-activated lights, and recorded every suspicious event. I also began discreetly looking into Karen Lancaster's background. She had been an executive at a property development firm before stepping down. There were rumors of a hush-hush settlement with an employee who accused her of discrimination. Nothing was publicly confirmed, but it painted a picture of a person who had a long history of belittling those she viewed as lesser. By the time Redwood Landing's open HOA meeting arrived, I was ready with a stack of evidence. Lily wanted to come with me. She insisted on speaking up for her rights. I admired her bravery, though part of me worried about putting her in the same room as Karen. The meeting was held in the community center, a pristine hall with shiny floors and rows of folding chairs facing a dais. Karen sat in the center with the other board members flanking her. She wore a pale blue blazer. Her posture screamed authority. The meeting commenced with mundane business. Landscaping budgets, proposals for a new flower bed near the entrance sign, those typical matters that lulled the audience into mild interest. Then Karen opened the floor for new concerns. I raised my hand, stood, and introduced myself. For the record, I'm here about the repeated denial of our wheelchair ramp permit and the recent acts of vandalism directed at my property. Karen gave me that polite smile. Yes, Mr. Carter, we've received your letters. As we've explained, Redwood Landing maintains strict standards for external modifications. We must reject all proposals that disrupt the uniform look of our homes. I glanced at Lily. She nodded, encouraging me. I faced Karen again. The Americans with Disabilities Act is clear that a necessary accommodation cannot be denied by an HOA. Your guidelines do not supersede federal law. Karen's serene expression never faltered. We're aware of ADA regulations, but Redwood Landing has its own charter, and those adjustments must still fall within our aesthetic guidelines. I'm afraid your ramp is not in compliance. We've suggested alternative solutions you refuse to accept. My voice grew firmer. You suggested building a hidden ramp at the back of the house, where Lily can't easily access the sidewalk or her school bus. That's not a reasonable solution. I felt tension in the room. Some neighbors avoided my gaze, while a few others looked sympathetic. Karen waved a hand with an air of practiced exasperation. It's not Redwood Landing's responsibility to adapt to every specialized need. We must preserve the value of our community for the majority. Someone else in the audience, a woman named Carla, stood up. That's not right. Lily is part of this community too. A murmur spread. Karen's facade strained just a bit. She quickly shifted gears. We understand the emotional aspect, but we have documentation showing repeated violations at the Carter residence. Not just the ramp, but unsightly clutter, yard maintenance issues. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. The clutter was a single potted plant Lily kept outside to attract butterflies. The yard was neat, albeit with a small patch of wildflowers that Lily loved. I pressed on. Additionally, my property has been vandalized. The ramp was tampered with, wheelchair tires deflated, and I have a video of someone approaching my house at odd hours. Karen's eyes flared momentarily. That's unfortunate. Redwood Landing does not condone criminal behavior. But you have no proof linking it to the HOA. Perhaps you should speak to the police. She uttered the last sentence with a dismissive shrug, a subtle challenge, implying the police were on her side. I opened my folder, ready to show pictures and timestamps. Karen interrupted. Your time is up. We have a long agenda, and there are other items to address. My frustration mounted. The meeting ended soon after, with no resolution, just a smug look on Karen's face. I overheard some neighbors whisper that Karen controlled the board like a puppet master. Others offered me condolences or a quiet apology for not stepping in. Lily left the meeting deflated, tears threatening her eyes. I leaned down and whispered, Don't lose hope. This isn't over. In the following days, more fines arrived in my mailbox. They were small but added up. $100 for excessive vegetation. $50 for improper trash bin placement. So at the time of leaving the house, the public health professionals in my neighborhood started noticing a black sedan parked near the entrance of our street, always idling but never too close to our house. Possibly a friend of Karen's, scoping us out. My instincts told me Redwood Landing was waging psychological warfare, expecting me to fold. They didn't know me, not really. I'd confronted worse adversaries. Just when I thought the conflict couldn't intensify further, that's when the sabotage on Lily's wheelchair brakes occurred, nearly causing her serious harm. She'd been returning from a friend's place. She realized the brakes weren't responding as she headed downhill toward the main intersection. That's the moment I described at the start. The heart-stopping rush, her desperate attempt to stop, the kind bystander who saved her from disaster. The paramedics arrived, checked Lily out. She had minor scrapes and was shaken but otherwise okay. They told me I needed to inspect that wheelchair because the cables were cut. I did so with trembling hands. Indeed, the cable sheath was sliced carefully and taped back together so it wouldn't be noticeable at a glance. At that point, all my rage and protective instincts boiled over. I'd dealt with con artists, drug traffickers, terrorists. None of them had ever attacked me so personally by targeting my daughter. I filed a formal complaint with the police, demanded an investigation, showed them the severed cable. They acted apologetic but seemed reluctant to pursue leads. I suspected Karen had influence over some local authorities. That night, Lily and I sat at the kitchen table, her bandaged arm resting in my view. She asked me point blank, "Dad, who would do this? Who would risk my life just because they hate seeing a wheelchair ramp?" My heart sank, knowing she'd lost the last shred of trust she had in Redwood Landing. I told her I had strong suspicions. I admitted that Karen Lancaster was a prime suspect. Lily said softly, "So, what do we do now? Move away?" I shook my head, placed a hand on hers. "We fight this. I'm not running. I'll protect you, no matter what it takes." That night she slept in my room, too afraid to be alone. The next morning, I contacted an old friend from the FBI who specialized in digital forensics. I explained the situation, asked if he'd help me set up advanced surveillance. He agreed, although it was unofficial and off the record. I purchased higher quality security cameras, installed them around the garage, the ramp, the entrances. I also placed a hidden camera inside the garage itself, aimed directly at Lily's wheelchair. If anyone tried to mess with it again, we would catch them in the act. My attorney prepared a thorough complaint, referencing the ADA, along with a restraining order request. Meanwhile, Redwood Landing's board issued new letters indicating they'd begin foreclosure proceedings if I didn't remove the ramp and pay fines. I was nearly at my wit's end. Lily asked if she could stay temporarily with her aunt in a different county. She felt unsafe, and I couldn't blame her. I agreed it might be best for her peace of mind. As soon as she was gone, I kicked my investigation into high gear. I spent days carefully observing patterns in the neighborhood. Who drove which cars? Who lingered outside at odd hours? Late one night, I saw a silhouette crossing our front yard on the camera feed. It paused near the ramp, fiddling with the edges, possibly checking if it could be tampered with again. Then it moved toward the garage. Adrenaline surged through me. I recognized the shape of the figure, slender, agile, the posture reminiscent of Karen. Before I could react, it moved away into the darkness. I realized I needed more direct evidence. The next day, I intentionally let slip that I planned to install a new, improved ramp design the following weekend. I said it loudly in front of a neighbor known to be close to the HOA. My hope was that Karen or one of her cronies would attempt to sabotage the new materials before or during installation, giving me the chance to catch them red-handed. My hunch proved correct. 2 nights later, an alert on my phone told me the garage door had been opened. A second later, my cameras triggered, capturing a figure carefully stepping inside. This time, the overhead light clicked on for a moment, illuminating Karen Lancaster's face. She wore black gloves. A small toolkit was strapped around her waist. She approached a stack of lumber I'd set aside for the ramp, examined it. I watched on my screen, heart pounding, as she removed a small container from her pocket, likely containing acid or some chemical to weaken the wood or screws. She glanced around, reached into her kit, and started tampering with the brackets I'd purchased for securing the ramp. Then she inched toward Lily's wheelchair, checking if it was there. I could see frustration in her eyes. Lily's chair wasn't present because Lily was away. Karen placed a hand on my tool bench, scanning for something else she could damage. My hidden camera caught every detail: the shape of her face, her unmistakable gaze, the quiet intensity of her crime. Then she cursed under her breath, softly but audibly, before turning off the overhead light and slipping back into the shadows. I replayed the footage multiple times, my anger coiling. This was more than enough to nail her for trespassing, attempted vandalism, and potentially a hate crime for targeting a disabled person's equipment. I also had a trove of evidence that Redwood Landing's board acted at her direction, but Karen didn't know the full scope of who she was dealing with. She didn't realize I had FBI contacts ready to step in once I had solid proof. I phoned my friend, the digital forensics specialist, to confirm the footage was crystal clear and time-stamped. He assured me it was perfect. The stage was set. I decided not to confront her immediately. In my experience, cornered criminals often become more dangerous. Instead, I arranged for a conversation with Redwood Landing's local prosecutor, explaining the severity of the situation and providing the videos. Initially, I sensed hesitance. Redwood Landing was known for its immaculate reputation, and Karen had connections. But once the prosecutor saw the footage of Karen in my garage, sabotage kit in hand, the conversation changed. I also revealed my FBI credentials. That morning, the prosecutor filed charges under both state trespassing laws and federal statutes regarding the sabotage of mobility equipment for a disabled individual. An arrest warrant was quietly drawn up. 2 days later, Redwood Landing was abuzz with a community event at the lake. Karen was center stage giving a speech about preserving the neighborhood's prestige. I stood near the back, wearing a jacket that clearly displayed the 3 letters, FBI. Her eyes flickered nervously when she spotted me in the crowd. Perhaps she sensed that something had shifted. After her speech, I approached with 2 uniformed officers. She tried to maintain composure, but her voice shook when she said, "Ah, Mr. Carter, enjoying the event?" I locked eyes with her. "Karen Lancaster, we have a warrant for your arrest." She acted outraged, demanded to see the documents. The officers produced the warrant. A hush fell over the crowd. Neighbors looked on in confusion. She spat out words about how Redwood Landing had laws, that I was harassing her, that she'd sue. Then, in a last-ditch attempt, she hissed, "This is preposterous. That ramp is an eyesore, and your daughter is using her condition to get special treatment." Gasps erupted. I signaled to the officers. They gently but firmly secured her wrists with handcuffs. She shrieked, "You'll regret this," as they led her away. I stared at her, remembering Lily's near-fatal brush with traffic. Anger and relief mixed inside me like oil and water. The aftermath was swift. Evidence against Karen included not just the sabotage attempts, but financial records that suggested misuse of HOA funds, intimidation tactics, and possible bribes to local officials. As the investigation expanded, Redwood Landing's squeaky clean veneer started to crumble. Several of Karen's board allies resigned. Local media picked up the story of how an HOA president allegedly tried to drive out a disabled girl. Lily came home to see headlines about Redwood Landing. She hugged me, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "I can't believe it's finally over," she said. I kissed the top of her head. There might be more fallout, but the worst is behind us. We soon discovered that Redwood Landing had a long history of pressuring anyone who didn't fit Karen's idea of normal. She'd orchestrated fines and petty legal threats to force them out. The local police chief, apparently a friend of Karen's, was now under scrutiny too. Lily's near-death experience proved to be the catalyst that blew the lid off it all. We cooperated with state investigators, handing over every shred of documentation. The Redwood Landing Board appointed an interim president who promptly dismissed all fines related to Lily's ramp, publicly apologized, and announced new policies to accommodate residents with disabilities. They even offered to pay for the permanent ramp construction. I tried to keep Lily's life as steady as possible amid the media flurry. She needed normalcy, homework, hanging out with friends, and working on her robotics club. And though Redwood Landing's hostility was now dismantled, Lily still had nightmares about the downhill runaway chair. She'd wake in the night, trembling, remembering how it felt to lose control while cars sped by. I'd hold her hand and reassure her she was safe. In calmer moments, She told me she wanted to use this experience to advocate for kids like her, to prevent others from living in fear. That's Lily in a nutshell, turning trauma into a drive to help others. Karen Lancaster's arraignment hearing came quickly. The courthouse was packed. I attended, wanting to show solidarity for Lily, though I kept her at home to spare her from the spectacle. Karen entered in a crisp suit, the usual controlled air replaced by visible anxiety. She pled not guilty, of course. Her lawyer tried to cast doubt on the footage, claiming it was doctored, that someone else must have broken into my garage, but the evidence was irrefutable. Over the following months, more charges piled up: financial fraud, intimidation, tampering with official HOA documents. The trial itself drew local and state attention as an example of HOA gone rogue. Disability rights activists followed it closely. Lily's story, that near-tragic sabotage, became a focal point. When Lily testified, I sat in the gallery, every muscle tensed. She spoke softly about the day her wheelchair lost its brakes, how she felt the tug of gravity and heard the roar of engines, how helpless it was to press the joystick controls in vain. Her voice quivered but never broke. By the time she finished, the courtroom was utterly silent. Even Karen's lawyer looked uneasy. Evidence from my cameras sealed the deal. There was Karen, rummaging in my garage, clearly tampering with ramp materials, an unsubtle reference to prior sabotage. In the end, the jury didn't take long to reach a verdict: guilty. The judge remarked that Karen's callous disregard for a disabled child's safety was among the most disturbing aspects of the case, and he sentenced her accordingly. Redwood Landing turned a page. The new HOA leadership was more inclusive. Many residents who'd previously stayed quiet came forward with their own stories, finding support and empowerment. Lily's ramp was finally upgraded to a permanent, safe structure that matched our house's exterior. She insisted on adding planters along the sides, vibrant flowers that softened the metal lines. She said it was proof that functionality and beauty can coexist. Meanwhile, local volunteers helped make Redwood Landing more accessible, installing curb cuts and improving sidewalks. A small pocket park in the neighborhood even got a new path for wheelchairs and strollers. As for me, I returned to my FBI duties with the satisfaction that Redwood Landing was no longer under the thumb of a petty tyrant. My superiors gave me a gentle admonishment for using certain investigative resources off-duty, but they understood the severity of the situation. There was no real penalty. In fact, the Redwood Landing case highlighted just how destructive an HOA can become when power is abused. I used the experience to push for better education on disability rights within local communities, suggesting a new outreach program that could help prevent such blatant discrimination. In the months after Karen's conviction, Lily found herself receiving messages from other teenagers in different parts of the country, each living under HOAs that tried to limit or complicate accessibility. She wrote back with encouragement and shared the steps we took, from documenting every incident to citing the ADA in formal complaints. Her spirit for advocacy blossomed. I watched her in awe, remembering the trembling girl who nearly crashed into traffic. Now, she was emerging as a voice for others like her, a living example that you don't have to accept injustice. One afternoon, the Redwood Landing community invited Lily to speak at a newly created inclusion committee, a direct result of the scandal. She wheeled up to the microphone set in front of the community hall. Rows of neighbors sat before her, many of whom previously avoided us. Now they wore supportive smiles. Lily took a moment to compose herself. She spoke about her dream of living in a place where neighbors looked out for each other instead of trying to push people out. She described how it felt to be targeted by petty rules, and how something as simple as a ramp meant the difference between imprisonment and freedom. At the end of her short speech, the applause was thunderous. A few people wiped tears from their eyes. She found me in the crowd and I gave her a thumbs up. My heart was so full of pride and relief, I thought it might burst. We still talk about that day Lily's brakes were cut, It's not an easy memory. She says sometimes it feels like a piece of her childhood was stolen, that she can't unfeel the terror. But she also acknowledges that it sparked a much-needed reckoning in Redwood Landing, possibly saving other families from similar harm. She's turned her bedroom into a mini maker space, building small robotics projects and coding. Her current idea is to create a buddy alarm system for wheelchairs that alerts a phone if any key components are tampered with. I told her I'd support her wholeheartedly. If such a device had existed earlier, it might have prevented that horrifying ride down the slope. Life in Redwood Landing gradually improved. People greeted Lily warmly as she wheeled by. Carla, the neighbor who once whispered warnings about Karen, became a close friend, bringing over fresh muffins on weekends. A man named Terrence, who had a mild mobility issue, confided that Karen once fined him for using a cane on the community tennis court walkway, claiming it might damage the surface. He said he was sorry he never spoke up before. Lily graciously told him not to dwell on the past. She was just happy Redwood Landing was changing. The new HOA board president, a kind-hearted woman named Melinda, reached out to me, asking if I had any ideas for further improvements. She spoke openly about how Redwood Landing had been hijacked by Karen's personal prejudices, how the board had been complicit out of fear or ignorance. Melinda wanted Redwood Landing to become a model of inclusivity, not the cautionary tale it had become in the press. I helped her connect with local disability rights organizations, giving them a platform to educate Redwood Landing's residents. Lily was invited to an event celebrating the new direction, where they symbolically replaced the old HOA sign, once featuring a closed gate motif, with a new design that showed an open gate amid a garden. It was a small but meaningful gesture, signifying that Redwood Landing was done with gatekeeping. Meanwhile, Karen's trial concluded with her sentencing. Years behind bars for attempted assault on a disabled minor, vandalism, and other related charges. Her accomplices on the board, those who helped cover up the misuse of funds, faced legal consequences too. The local police chief, who turned a blind eye for so long, resigned under public pressure. A new chief came in, vowing to restore trust. Some of Karen's supporters tried to claim everything was a smear campaign, but the evidence was unassailable. Redwood Landing finally had accountability. I realized through it all that real villains aren't always the ones brandishing guns or running massive criminal operations. Sometimes evil arrives in the guise of a polite neighbor who manipulates bureaucratic rules to crush anyone who doesn't fit their narrow view of normal. It's insidious precisely because it hides behind everyday civility. If Lily's brake cable sabotage had succeeded in killing her, it would have been labeled a tragic accident. But I knew better, and justice in this case arose from perseverance, documentation, and the unwavering love a father holds for his child. Gradually, Redwood Landing transformed into something genuinely closer to what it always pretended to be, a lovely suburban neighborhood where people could feel safe and included. Lily felt comfortable enough to go out on her own again, no longer fearing random acts of sabotage. She attended school events and robotics club meets, forging new friendships. I resumed my FBI work more fully, traveling on assignments without having to worry if Lily would be harassed or threatened in her own home. Of course, I still checked in with her often. She teased me about being overprotective. I told her she'd just have to deal with her dad's eternal vigilance. About a year after the incident, Redwood Landing held an accessibility fair, featuring booths and presentations on inclusive design, assistance technologies, and resources for families with special needs. Lily displayed a prototype of her buddy alarm wheelchair device. People flocked to her booth, impressed by her initiative. She explained the concept calmly, occasionally looking over at me with a spark of gratitude. I watched from a distance, letting her shine. She'd turned pain into invention, adversity into advocacy. Karen Lancaster had tried to silence her by cutting her brakes. Lily responded by making sure no one else would ever experience that terror. At the fair's closing ceremony, the new HOA board gave Lily a small plaque recognizing her contributions to a more inclusive community. Lily was visibly embarrassed but grateful. She nudged me and whispered, "Remember how they called me an eyesore? Now they're giving me awards." I said, "You're not just part of this community, you're shaping it." She teared up and gave me a tight hug. We left the fair hand in hand, a father and daughter who'd faced a twisted campaign of hostility in the place we called home. Yet Redwood Landing was ours now, truly ours, because we had refused to leave. We had fought for our right to live peacefully, and in doing so, we'd uncovered a vast network of corruption. Sometimes I reflect on that last moment I saw Karen in court. She refused to meet my gaze as the verdict was read, still convinced that Redwood Landing was her personal kingdom. But Redwood Landing belonged to all of us, including Lily, and no single tyrant could hold it hostage anymore. These days we enjoy the simpler aspects of suburban life. We have neighbors over for barbecues in our backyard. We share stories about how Redwood Landing used to be under Karen's iron grip, how fear crept through the streets. But we also acknowledge the good that emerged from exposing that darkness. Lily finds acceptance in ways I never thought possible. Neighbors volunteer to build custom planters by her ramp, kids from down the street collaborate with her on robotics projects, and the new board actively invites input from residents. The tension that once blanketed Redwood Landing has lifted, replaced by a sense of shared community. People realized how close they came to letting prejudice define their neighborhood. That awareness fosters humility and kindness. U.S. Lily and I still talk about the sabotage and how easily it could have ended her life. She asks me occasionally, "Would everything have changed if I'd died?" That question hits me like a punch in the gut. I gather her into my arms, hold her tight, and say, "I'm just glad we never had to find out." I explain that sometimes tragedy leads to change, but it shouldn't require a life lost for people to see the cruelty around them. Lily nods, thoughtful, her eyes reflecting a maturity beyond her years. Our shared experiences have drawn us closer. She knows I would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. During one of my FBI assignments, I found myself investigating a separate matter in a nearby county, unrelated to Redwood Landing, but it involved possible corruption in local governance. As I reviewed evidence and interviewed witnesses, I recalled Redwood Landing's unraveling. I saw parallels in how a small group of individuals manipulated power to serve themselves, ignoring the needs of the community. It reinforced for me that injustice can lurk anywhere, from big cities to quiet suburbs. People like Karen operate under the radar until something or someone forces their wrongdoing into the light. When Lily asks about my job, I tell her it's not just about catching criminals who break big federal laws. Sometimes it's about upholding the spirit of justice in the everyday. Redwood Landing taught me that. She smiles at that notion and jokes that I should put it in a motivational poster. But I see the respect in her eyes, the understanding that our personal battle dovetailed with a broader fight for fairness. In quieter moments, I imagine a future where Lily, older and even more confident, designs accessibility solutions that revolutionize the lives of people with disabilities. Maybe she'll start her own company, or maybe she'll join a major tech giant. Whatever she does, I know she'll carry Redwood Landing's lessons in her heart. That prejudice often wears a polite face. That you sometimes have to stand your ground and gather evidence when no one else believes you. She's talked about applying to colleges known for engineering, and I promised I'd support her wholeheartedly, even if it means I have to relocate for her sake. But for now, we're happy staying in Redwood Landing, watching it slowly evolve from a place that wanted her gone to a place that embraces her. Every so often I get asked by neighbors, "Why didn't you just move? You had the money, the ability to relocate." The answer is always the same, because we shouldn't have to run from discrimination in our own home. And if we'd left, Karen would have targeted someone else. Lily was the catalyst that forced Redwood Landing to confront its rotten core. Leaving wouldn't have solved anything. Eventually, Redwood Landing might have become a fortress for cruelty, with Karen collecting more power. By staying, by fighting, we protected not only Lily, but future families who might face similar oppression. That's the moral of the story. Tyranny sometimes thrives in the mundane corners of life, behind rulebooks and false smiles. But it only thrives if we let it. When we challenge it head-on, armed with evidence and a refusal to submit, we can dismantle it. And when we stand together, even the most stubborn oppressor falls. Redwood Landing was the battleground for that truth. In the end, the ramp we built for Lily wasn't just a physical structure, it was a symbol of standing firm, a reminder that her life and dignity mattered more than any property value or aesthetic guideline. And if there's one thing I've learned from a career in the FBI, it's that justice has a way of emerging when people refuse to stay silent. Lily continues to push forward, her wheelchair crossing the Redwood Landing sidewalks without fear. Occasionally, she glances at the intersection where her brakes once failed, a fleeting shadow in her expression. But then she presses onward, chin lifted, determined to claim the freedoms she was nearly denied. I walk by her side, proud and humbled by her resilience. If the world had more children like Lily, unafraid to face adversity, armed with compassion and ingenuity, we'd see fewer Karens, fewer petty tyrants, and more neighborhoods that truly honor every resident's right to belong. We're staying in Redwood Landing for the foreseeable future, partly because Lily loves her school's robotics program and partly because we refuse to let fear push us out. Our once contentious front yard now hosts neighborhood gatherings. Lily's ramp is decorated with potted flowers, a beacon of the new Redwood Landing spirit. Families stop by to chat, some admitting they'd been silent allies, others confessing they'd been too scared to oppose Karen. We welcome them all the same. Over time, Redwood Landing has become more than just a place on the map. It's a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even when it means going up against a formidable HOA that tried to weaponize rules against a disabled teenager. In the end, Karen Lancaster thought she could bully a father and his disabled daughter into submission. She underestimated Lily's courage. She also underestimated mine. Sabotaging that wheelchair was the final straw that ripped away her mask of polite society, exposing the raw hatred and control she thrived on. She didn't consider that behind that front door she was so desperate to keep Ramp free, there lived a federal agent with the training and determination to dismantle an entire operation of corruption if needed. There's some poetic justice in that. I'm sure she never saw it coming when she first laid eyes on us. Just another single father and his daughter moving in, but Lily and I share a stubborn streak. We don't back down easily when something this important is at stake. Some nights, Lily and I talk about the future. She sees Redwood Landing as both a memory of pain and a platform for her voice. She wants to write a book one day, maybe a guide on how communities can be more inclusive, how to navigate legal battles with HOAs, or even a personal memoir on her transformation from frightened newcomer to advocate. I encourage her, telling her that her story could save lives or at least spare others from the same traumatic experiences. She smiles, leaning into my shoulder, and says she's grateful we stayed. I'll never forget that moment. I sprinted after her runaway wheelchair, heart lodged in my throat, certain I was about to watch my daughter die. Whenever I replay it in my mind, the memory ends with that stranger who jumped in front of Lily, stopping her just in time. I never caught his name, but I wish I could shake his hand, invite him to dinner. He was the immediate hero that day. Yet in the grand scheme, Lily herself became a hero too. She overcame the personal terror of that day to stand tall against Redwood Landing's tyranny, shining a light on corruption that had thrived behind picket fences. The sabotage might have been labeled an accident if we hadn't pursued the truth. Karen might have walked away with the satisfaction of ridding the neighborhood of a so-called eyesore. Instead, Lily is still here, wheels rolling on sunlit sidewalks, forging a community she can truly call home. And Redwood Landing will never be the same. That is how we know we did the right thing by refusing to remain silent. That is the power of one family's determination not to be cast aside by an HOA or anyone else. When you hear the phrase, HOA Karen, cut the brakes on my disabled daughter's wheelchair. It might sound like a tabloid headline, some sensational rumor, but it is the chilling truth of how far prejudice can go when left unchecked. And it's also the story of how a determined father and a courageous daughter chose to stand their ground and reclaim the safety and dignity that should have always been theirs.